exactly 1 year ago, I posted my first ever video on YouTube, and it was a January reading wrap-up. It was a very scary thing for me to dive into, and I didn't even really fully want to do it, but my husband encouraged me to give it a try, because why not? So we had a weekend away, booked already at a getaway cabin. I was going to do some reading, he was going to do some filming, and we filmed my first ever video. I think about 22 people watched it in total, and I had 2 subscribers, and one of them was Jake. But it's never really been about the numbers or the views for me. This has always just been a creative outlet and something that I absolutely love doing. I work a 9-to-5 job, and this really has just been such a fun thing to put creative energy into, and something that I can have as a hobby that's just fun and for me. So I have absolutely loved doing it. I have loved gaining new friends along the way and people to talk about books with, talk about the overhyped books and the underhyped books and what we're all currently reading at the time. It's just been such a fun year, and I am so excited to continue it onwards. So without further ado, we are now full circle from a year ago, and it is time to talk about all of the books that I read in January. Let's get into it. So if you watched my Throne of Glass reading vlog from earlier this month, you know that I'm currently rereading the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I read the first book in the series, the titular Throne of Glass, back in December. It was my last book of 2024, and then I read the next 3 books in the series this month. So let's talk about them one by one. So Throne of Glass follows our main character, Celaena Sardothien, over the course of 8 books, and I want to say a couple of years, maybe 2-ish years, as she goes through this giant war in her kingdom and her land, and she starts out as kind of the best known assassin in this world. Even though she's like a 16, 17, 18-year-old girl, she is the most feared assassin in the land, and she slowly develops and grows into being a leader during this massive world war that's going on in the land. So we meet her for the first time in Throne of Glass when she is competing in these games, these assassin games, to decide who is going to be the king's champion, essentially. And that first book is very YA. It's pretty cringy at times. It's not my favorite thing in the world, and I remember that from the first time that I tried to read it. Book 1 was just kind of difficult for me to get through, just because it really did feel very, very young. And I would say that Crown of Midnight, the second book, kind of follows the same thing as Throne of Glass, at least for me and how I experienced reading it. It feels very young. A lot of the dialogue feels kind of cringy. It's very hyperbolic, over the top. There's honestly, in my opinion, not a lot going on that captures my attention and that I want to really keep reading through. And I knew this from the first time that I had read the series. Book 1 and book 2 are tough for me. They just feel very young. And if you are not in the mood for that type of book and that type of fantasy, it's going to be extremely cringy and awkward for you to read, and you're not going to enjoy it. So you have to know what you're getting into, and you have to know what type of book it is, and you really, really, really have to be in the mood for it. I cannot stress that enough, or else I truly don't think it'll be very enjoyable for you. So I knew this going into it. I was very much in the mood, and actually from the very first time that I read the series, I think I enjoyed Throne of Glass a little bit more than the first time I read it, and I think I enjoyed Crown of Midnight a little bit less from the first time that I read it. So in Crown of Midnight, a lot more is being revealed about the world that we're in, our main antagonist. There's like a bunch of little antagonists as well throughout the series, and the story starts to get a little bit bigger, the stakes start to get a little bit higher, and I did enjoy that, but I felt like the end of this book I didn't really like. The pacing felt very quick and very rushed near the end in a way that felt super jarring, and almost like we had had this entire setup in the beginning and now we had to get to our final point in the book. There wasn't a very clear bridge to get us from point A to point D, and there's like B and C in there randomly, but we just kind of hopped right over it straight to D towards the end. That's a very odd analogy, but it's kind of the best way that I can think about it. I did enjoy it. Again, I kind of knew what I was getting into, but I did enjoy it a little bit less than the first time I read it, so I landed at a 3 out of 5 stars for Crown of Midnight. And then I moved on to The Assassin's Blade, which is actually the prequel to the Throne of Glass series, but it's a little bit confusing. So Throne of Glass was published first, and then Crown of Midnight was published, and then The Assassin's Blade was published. accomplished, but you can read Assassin's Blade in a number of different positions in the series. Some people swear by reading it first before you even start Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight and the whole series itself. Some people swear by second, third, and there are even a couple people out there that say that you should read the book fourth. There's also people out there that say you should read it last after you've read all the other books. My personal opinion is that you should read it third, which is in the publication order. To me, if I had read it first before going into Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, a lot of the things that are discussed in this book, I truly just wouldn't have cared about if I had read it first because I didn't have context as it relates to the larger story. So reading it third was perfect because in books 1 and 2, we had almost heard whisperings of these side quests that Celaena goes on, these little mini stories that she encounters throughout her journey as being an assassin. If you read it first, I think that it doesn't feel as important in my opinion. But if you read it third, you kind of get a little bit of the history. You get some of her character history, and then this kind of reveals why she is the way she is and why she is currently in the place that she is as well. And it was just great reading it in third place in my opinion. This is actually 5 novellas wrapped into one book, so it's not necessarily a continuous story. You can read the novellas just kind of separately from each other, and I liked them. It was an enjoyable reading experience. I actually was expecting to like it a lot less because I'm not really a prequel girl. I don't really care. If it's not necessarily part of the main story, if something is dubbed as a prequel, I don't know why. It's just so difficult for me to care. And so I always avoided reading this. I also am not a huge novella person as well. I kind of feel like there's not enough time to get to know a character or get to really immerse yourself in a story. So that's another reason why I avoided this book the first time that I read through the series. But this time, reading it in third place and having the context and the history of the rest of the series, I enjoyed it a lot. There are a couple stories in here where I feel like Celaena is very immature, very cringy, just not at all the type of character that I super enjoy reading. But then there are some other stories in here that give her a lot of depth and give her a lot of growth mechanisms for her character development, which I really, really appreciated. And the ending is very emotional. It's very tragic. A lot of people know how the book ends and sort of what this entails. And I also knew going into it what I was getting into, but it definitely got me. It got me right in the feels. I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to, and I ended up rating this a 4 out of 5 stars. I also think reading Assassin's Blade third is great because there are references in the third book of the series, Heir of Fire, to Assassin's Blade that feel so much stronger and so much more emotional if you read Assassin's Blade right before going into Heir of Fire. So that's another reason why I would encourage people to read it in the third place. Heir of Fire is such a good book. I forgot how amazing this book is. I knew that books 1 and 2 were tough for me to get through and not really the most enjoyable reading experience for me, but as soon as I get to Heir of Fire, this is where emotionally the series really starts for me. The world starts to expand very, very vastly because we start jumping around POVs. In the first 2 books and in Assassin's Blade, we are only with Celaena as our main POV, and we don't get to really be in a lot of other people's perspectives, maybe a little bit, but not totally. Whereas in this, we're following like 4 different characters' POVs at any one time and jumping around a lot. And I think that if SJM had done that type of writing in the very beginning, starting with book 1, that would have been tough to get to know these characters, and I would have struggled jumping around POVs. But because she saved the jumping around for the 3rd book, technically the 4th if you are counting the prequel in that as well, there's so much history that you already have with these characters that you know them, and it feels okay to jump around because you've already spent so much time with them. And that really allows the story to just explode in scale. And I just love it so much. I feel like Celaena specifically goes through intense character development here. Whereas in the prequel and books 1 and 2, she kind of annoys me. I don't really relate to her. I find it difficult to have empathy and compassion for her because she's just very cocky. She's very young, and her immaturity definitely shows through, which was always irritating and a little bit obnoxious to me. But going into Heir of Fire, she becomes an entirely different character, literally. She becomes somebody totally new, and I think that the pacing of that transformation is beautifully done because she has to train physically, emotionally, mentally. She has to go through this intense transformation, and it never felt rushed. If anything, it was almost too slow sometimes, where I was getting frustrated. That's just like, oh my gosh, you have to learn this, like move on. But when you get to the end and the final conflict, when she kind of reveals herself and reveals everything that she has gone through, it is so satisfying because it feels real and it feels earned and nothing feels rushed. So I think the pacing in this book is amazing. I love getting to be with some of the other characters. We get some new characters that are introduced in this book, new creatures that are introduced, and everything about it is so exciting to me. I love it so much. There are a couple moments in this book where I was truly bawling my eyes out. And I remember that from the first time that I read it. This book, for some reason, made me cry like a lot. If you know, you know. The fact that it draws out such deep emotions inside of me, sadness, anxiety, excitement, that is absolutely a 5-star read to me, and I'm always thinking about it, and I just love it so much. So Heir of Fire, so good. I'm very excited to move on to the rest of the series and hopefully finish it in the month of February as well. Okay, moving on to books that were outside of the Throne of Glass series. I read Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. So this book was actually on my 2025 most anticipated releases. I got it from Book of the Month back in December as an early release, but I didn't read it until January. I picked it as my Book of the Month because I read the synopsis and I was instantly hooked on the story. I thought it was so interesting. What I read was that it follows our main character, Grady Green, who is an author, and one night his wife gets into a car accident, or she comes across something on the road that causes her to stop her car while she's on the phone with her husband Grady, and she gets out of the car to try to investigate something, and our main character Grady can hear her, she's speaking to him, and all of a sudden his wife totally disappears and he doesn't see her again. So a year goes by and he is unable to write, he is depressed, he is anxious, he can't make a living at all, and he's just really down in the dumps, and he decides to go to Scotland to kind of get away and reset, and all of a sudden on this remote island in Scotland he sees his wife. And that was the synopsis that I read, and I was like, yep, 100% sign me up, that seems amazing. And I had heard of Alice Feeney, I hadn't read any of her books, but I had heard that generally she's pretty well liked. So I started reading this book, and true to the synopsis, we are with our author, Grady Green. He is on the phone with his wife as she is driving home to celebrate him becoming a New York Times best-selling author, and all of a sudden she comes across something in the road that makes her stop, get out of the car and investigate, and then all of a sudden she disappears. Now Grady is thinking that she is kidnapped, she is killed, because his wife is an investigative journalist and she has a lot of people that are threatening her and they come after her because she investigates a lot of crime, and specifically a lot of crime against women. So she's made some enemies for sure. So she disappears and Grady is like, somebody kidnapped her, somebody killed her, she has tons of enemies, this is crazy, we need to find her. And a year goes by and he's working with the police and he's doing everything he can to find her, and nobody can. And like I said, he gets super depressed, he is very sad, he can't write, which means he can't make a living, he has to sell his house, he's living in a crappy hotel with his dog, and one day he goes and talks to his publisher, and his publisher's like, look, I like you, I want to see you succeed, I want to help you. I had this client who had passed away a couple years ago, but he had a cabin on a remote island in Scotland that he would always write at, and he gave it to me in his will when he died. So I want to send you, Grady Green, to this island to try to write a book so that you can make both of us a living again. So Grady's like, okay, whatever, I'm gonna go do that. And so he goes to this island in Scotland to try and write, and when he gets there, things are creepy, things are weird, not everything is as it seems. All of the townspeople on this island, and there's only like 25 people on this island, are very sketchy. They basically won't let him leave the island, but they keep chalking it up to, oh, the ferry can't come because the weather is bad, or, you know, we're an island that just kind of does it whenever we want to, so maybe the ferry will come at some point, and it just never does. So Grady is trying to write, and he's getting haunted, essentially, is what it feels like. He feels like he's going crazy. He is seeing his wife everywhere, and he doesn't know why. I like that. That's a cool synopsis. I was here for it. I was very hooked on the story itself. I wanted to know what happened next. However, I think I hated the writing style of this book. I don't know why. It's first-person perspective, and I think it needed to be third person, mainly because being first person perspective with this particular character, Grady, was so annoying. He is just the living worst. I hated everything about him. And when I am not able to like my main character, I have such a hard time getting through the book itself. It also was weird because this book did one of those things that I absolutely hate, where you are first person perspective, but the character that you are with knows more than you, which I always find a little bit weird, because if you are in their head, if we are reading their minds, if we are hearing their thoughts, then really we should know everything that they know. But it's like the character is withholding information from somebody that's reading this book, and it kind of feels like a weird fourth wall break, and it totally takes me out of the immersion experience where I really want to feel like I'm in the world. I really want to feel like I'm with a character. When I get to the end of a chapter and the character is like, oh, if only they knew what I was hiding. So many times a chapter would end and Grady would be like, yeah, but they don't know what I've done. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what you've done either, but you're acting as if you've done nothing, but then you end the chapter on a super weird cliffhanger that's like, but I'm the worst person in the world and they don't know why. Ugh, it was so annoying. He was very, very obnoxious. I couldn't stand it. There was also a dual timeline thing going on with a different POV from somebody else that I did enjoy, and I was glad initially that we were getting that POV, but there's a major twist slash reveal at the end of the book that ended up making me hate it. I really, really didn't like it at all. I think there were just so many writing mechanisms in this that felt completely unnecessary. It felt like the author was trying to get an emotional response out of me, but through manipulation and trickery, and it wasn't actually genuine, the feelings that they were trying to get me to feel. And I powered through the book because it was a cool enough plot premise and synopsis at the beginning that I wanted to know what happened, but the ending just completely fell apart. It was so tough to get through. I was extremely disappointed in this book, especially because it was on the list of one of my 2025 anticipated releases. So this was a big bummer all around. I ended up rating this 2 stars out of 5, and I just wouldn't recommend it. I don't think you should waste your time. I am curious though if anybody else has read any other Alice Feeney books and what they think of them, because it doesn't feel like she's an awesome writer, if I have to be honest, but maybe it was just isolated to this book, because I do feel like I've heard good things about her. So I'm super curious if anybody else has read her books, would recommend one that is better, or has had a similar reading experience as I have with it, because that was sad. That was a disappointment to me for sure. Next, I read my first R.F. Kuang book ever, and that was Yellowface. So this author has been on my radar for quite a while. I know she wrote The Poppy Wars, which part of me is interested in reading and the other part of me doesn't want to read because I have heard that there are some major trigger warnings in it, and I haven't done enough research to know if that is kind of past my threshold of what I want to read, but I am kind of interested in it. I was more interested in reading Yellowface, and Babel as well is very high up on my list of priorities to read for the year, but I started with Yellowface just because it was short. I had heard really good things about it and it felt like a good introduction to the author. So this follows our main character, June Hayward, who is an author as well, similar to the last book that I read, Beautiful Ugly. She is an author though who is really, really struggling. She published one book in her career and it was basically a flop, but she's put in a lot of work and she's just struggled over and over again to make money off of this thing that she loves. So I think when we meet her, she is teaching classes at a local college to try and make money while she's writing. She was friends with this woman named Athena in college and kind of stayed in touch throughout the years, who was also an author. She is the type of person that just found immediate success. She also published her debut novel around the same time that June did, and where June's was a major flop, Athena's was instant success, an absolute bestseller. She became super rich, super famous. Everybody's completely obsessed with her. She has Netflix deals and Hulu deals, and she's asked to come and speak at all of these conferences, and June kind of always looks at her a bit jealously just because she's kind of living her dream life, but at the same time she doesn't have a lot of friends in the industry, and so they meet up like once a month for drinks to talk about stuff, and June always just describes Athena as very magnetic but also kind of self-centered at the same time. So they have kind of a very interesting friendship slash relationship. Well, we open up and they are getting drunk at a bar, and they end up going back to Athena's ritzy loft apartment to have some more drinks, and they end up making pancakes like breakfast food at night. They were just kind of craving it, and Athena chokes and dies dies on a pancake. And June witnesses this very traumatic event, is really struggling with it, has to go through the whole EMT's process. She has to talk to the police about it. It's a very, very big thing. But after kind of the dust settles, it is revealed that June stole an unpublished manuscript from Athena. Athena is known for not showing anybody her works of writing, and so June figured that nobody would have seen this, nobody would have known that she was writing this book, and so she took it and she tweaked it a bit and she published it herself. She also published it under her middle name, June Song, to kind of be a little bit racially ambiguous to drive sales, because actually the book was focusing on Chinese soldiers during World War II, and she was like, well, I'm a white woman talking about this, and that's gonna be weird, so I'm gonna publish this book under Juniper Song, just to like maybe trick people, but I won't ever say that I'm actually Chinese. I am white. Maybe they won't immediately assume that, which is just so crazy to me. The drama of this book is absolutely insane. I was so hooked throughout the entire thing, and as the book that June publishes gets super, super successful, she starts experiencing the world of social media and people loving her, people hating her. The publishing world is insane, and everything that goes on in this book is just high stakes drama the entire time, because we know that June is lying and that she didn't actually fully write this book that she published, and you know that something is happening, you know a conflict is coming, but it's just so stressful. This book was such a stressful read, but it was also very fun at the same time. It gave me anxiety, but it also gave me joy. It was very strange. I've never read a book like this before, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think the ending was a little bit confusing for me, and it wasn't quite as satisfying as I wanted it to be. I think I just wanted something a bit different for the ending, and that's maybe the reason why it wasn't a 5 stars, but I absolutely would recommend that everybody read this, because it's just like a wild time. I was very torn when it came to our main character, because I knew that she was doing something wrong over and over and over again, but the way that it was written, this is first person perspective as well, and June was so good at convincing herself in her brain that what she was doing wasn't actually that bad, so good at it that even me as the reader, I'm reading it and I'm like, yeah, it's not that bad. Like, she's not really doing anything that wrong, you know? But then other times I would be so frustrated because she's making another horrible decision that is morally wrong. But I also really want to like the main character that I'm reading about. I was all over the board with this one, a total spectrum of emotions, and that's why it was such a fun read in my opinion. I ended up rating this a 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, it did knock down just a little bit from a 5-star rating just because I wasn't fully satisfied with the ending, but overall, such a great read. Highly recommend this one. And then, of course, you know what I ended my month with, and I know that I'm not alone in this. Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This book has been anticipated by many, many, many people as soon as the publication date was announced for Onyx Storm, the 3rd book in the Imperium series, which is Fourth Wing more commonly known. Everybody was pre-ordering, everybody was so excited about this, and I was among those people as well. But I think everybody was maybe a little bit more wary going into Onyx Storm, including me, just because in my opinion, Fourth Wing was so fun. I loved Fourth Wing. It was an absolute 5-star for me, and I've read it twice. I ended up rereading it the same year, and I had the same experience. I loved it so much. I know that there are a lot of issues with it. It's not a perfect book, but it's fun, and it got me out of a major reading slump, and I just love that book. Iron Flame came out the same year that book 1 was published. It had a very, very short release period in between the 2 books, and Iron Flame was a bit of a disaster. Everybody had such high expectations for Iron Flame, and it was not very good. It was a major disappointment. I still had fun with it, but not anywhere near the amount of fun that I had with Fourth Wing. So Iron Flame was a large step down. It felt very rushed. It felt confusing. There were typos in it. The relationship between the 2 main characters was just so annoying to me. It just wasn't good. The ending was wild and explosive and crazy, and it ended on a major cliffhanger that made me more excited for Onyx Storm, but overall it was a large disappointment, and I think that comes down to expectations. Because I had such a good time with Fourth Wing, the 1st book, I expected a similar experience and I didn't get it, so it was very disappointing. With Onyx Storm, I think I went into it with a little bit more realistic expectations, a little bit more level expectations. I was a bit more wary, I think. And I think that that was a good thing and allowed me to enjoy it a little bit more. The whole time I was reading it, I was not comparing it to Fourth Wing because I just knew it wasn't going to match that level for me, I was comparing it to Iron Flame, which I didn't reread before reading Onyx Storm, and I kind of wish that I had. I didn't want to, because honestly I just didn't want to read Iron Flame again, but I almost wish that I had, just because there were a lot of things in here that I didn't remember. There were characters in here that felt totally new to me, so I had to do a little bit of Googling and recapping anytime I would come across something that felt a little bit unfamiliar. So that wasn't great, and that is my own fault. The whole time I was comparing it to Iron Flame, and I think I've landed that I liked it more than Iron Flame. I think that one of the main reasons why I ended up liking it more than Iron Flame is honestly just because of the relationship between Xaden and Violet. In Fourth Wing, it's the beginning of the relationship, so there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of romance, there's a lot of figuring it out that's going on, which I enjoyed, and I thought that it was fun to read. In Iron Flame, there is so much jealousy, there is so much miscommunication, there is so much non-communication, unnecessary secrets, and that was so frustrating and so annoying that I think it brought my entire opinion of Iron Flame down quite a few notches. In this one, I think that they're a little bit more stabilized. We don't necessarily deal with a lot of the annoying miscommunication trope conflict stuff, and they're just kind of maybe existing a little bit more seamlessly in the story, and that alone I think makes me like it a bit more than Iron Flame. I think one of the main issues that I have with Onyx Storm is the pacing. It felt very start-stop. It felt very high climaxes, and then all of a sudden we're dropping down to like something very chill and unrelated to what just happened in the previous chapter. Like the amount of times that they would be in some sort of battle or some sort of intense conflict, the chapter would end very abruptly, and then it would be like 3 days later I woke up in my bedroom, and I'm like, whoa, hold on, that was such a fast transition. That happened many times. Or we changed locations very quickly, where in one chapter we're over here on this continent, and then in the other chapter we're like 500 miles away on a different continent, and we're like jumping around so much, and it just felt, again, very start-stop, very jarring. The pacing didn't feel seamless. It didn't feel like we were rising to this large conflict climax. It just kind of felt like very up, down, up, down, up, down, and I don't love reading those types of books. It's hard for me to get into the story that way, just because it's very fatiguing to continually have a high climax down to something low again, and then we're picking it back up, and then we're bringing it back down again. It just got a little bit tiring for me to read. So I think that was my main issue with it. The ending, I don't know how to process. Something very large and intense happens, which was not unexpected for me. Like, we could all assume that there was going to be a major cliffhanger at the end of this, especially because of the way that book 2 ended. So I was expecting to end on a cliffhanger, but the cliffhanger that it did end on was honestly very confusing to me. I haven't fully wrapped my brain around it because I just finished the book. So I don't know. There's part of me that wants to reread everything start to finish, all 3 books, just because I think that it suffered a little bit breaking all of the reading up, because I just forgot things. There's so many characters in this book. There's so many side characters. There's a lot of political stuff that happens, and a lot of political figures that you have to know what land they're attached to and who they're speaking on behalf of, and it's very confusing and hard to follow, especially if there was a large gap between Iron Flame and Onyx Storm. So I should have reread the series. I don't know if I want to reread it right now, certainly not anytime soon, but there is part of me that's like, okay, at the end of the year, or maybe if we get an announcement for when book 4 is coming out, I think I would reread everything leading up to that book 4, just so that I have a clear picture of who all of the main players are in this world and in this series. Overall, I enjoyed it. Again, I don't know if it's just because my expectations were lower, so it kind of matched it. Like, I wasn't disappointed in the book, but I think it's just because I knew more what to expect, and I was a little bit more guarded going into it than Iron Flame. So I ended up rating this a 3.75 stars. I think that some people will say that maybe that's a little bit higher than it deserves. And for me, I just really enjoy the world. I really enjoy the dragons in it. It's just a fun read, and I am able to kind of decompartmentalize a bit versus that really good, well-written book, and something that's just fun to go through and a great form of escapism, and there are cool dragons in it. So I'm landing at a 3.75. I think Iron Flame was at a 3.5 or maybe even a little bit lower, and Fourth Wing was at a 5 stars for me. So we're kind of all over the board a little bit here, but dare I say, here's hoping for something better in book 4? I don't know. These were all of the books that I ended up reading in January. It was a pretty good month for me. I've loved going through Throne of Glass. We had a couple disappointments, but my first R of Kwong book as well is very exciting, and I can't wait to read more of her work. So let me know what you ended up reading in January. If you had any amazing books that you read, any specific disappointments, I would love to chat about it in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching and joining and hanging out with me on this corner of the internet, and we will see you next time.